All right. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Three Percenters Podcast. I'm Christopher Mills. I got David and I got Ife here. We're back again talking to you about a renovation project that my brothers over here, Ife and David, finished their first project, as well as some other investors, but they were the main ones. And this was a big this was a big project for them. It was a brand new project, and yeah, it was a duplex, David, right? If a
Mhm.
duplex. And that was even a first one for me to be kind of a part of on the back end of it. But yeah, I've heard a lot of stories. I'm sure most of you watching who are investors who do renovations or have managed renovations or invested in renovation. Um, it is not an easy task. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of cash. No matter how well your team is, sometimes the projections, there's just things that happen. There's things out of your control that just happen. But it kind of takes the strength and the will to move forward. These guys, they did a really good job, in my opinion. I've seen and heard a lot of stories and been a part of a lot of projects, and um, they reached the finish line. Most people, was it David Ife? It took what, a year and a half, something like that.
A year since we started construction. We started construction February. We
I got
bought it
time first.
fall 2022. We started construction in February 23, and then we wrapped up literally at the end of January 24. So right at a year since we started
Yeah.
construction, but since
Yeah,
purchase been since November 2022. Yeah.
yeah. So minus a couple of months for like closing and lending stuff. The construction obviously takes the longest, and I've seen a lot of projects don't finish and they have to sell in the middle of a project, or they have to go through three or four different general contractors. Luckily, these guys were able to finish with just one, and yeah. So I want to give the floor to you guys. I want you guys to kind of get to the nitty gritty of it. I'm sure like we do in Three Percenters, we don't really hold back. We're very transparent, and we don't talk shit about people, but we try to be as transparent as possible, and because people want to hear kind of the ins and outs, and yeah. So I'll let y'all start off and kind of tell us what happened, what was your experience, what did you learn, if you could go back and do things differently, what are some things you could do differently. So I'll give the floor to you guys. I'm gonna be on mute most of this, so I'm gonna listen.
Yeah. If you want to get started, want me to get started?
I'll go first. I
Go
mean,
ahead.
I think my biggest lesson from this whole journey was that you can't expect people to live up to your expectation if you're not putting in like recurring due diligence. Like we had situations where we thought the inspector's gonna inspect it, right? But the inspector is just doing like a surface level job. They're not really getting into the nitty gritty of things. And then at the same time, your contractor, he's not in your head. Like you have to like constantly be on him because you have expectations, but that person might not have the same expectations. So it's like as much as you want it to be passive, it really comes down to being an active job because you have to kind of go back and forth with everybody that is working on the project in order for it to be that grade A kind of construction, which is kind of what I saw from the whole process. And that's pretty much it on my side. I know David might have a lot more to add there.
Yeah. I want this to be a bit structured, so I'll give this just some background and I'll give some tips to new investors who are looking to get into development. So, with all the challenges, I would say obviously it's still a huge win to add to the portfolio. It's a duplex that was essentially um, in a pretty bad state. It was burnt. Uh, One half of it is severely burnt, the other half not looking so great. And so we purchased a duplex that's by the Southside Beltline in Atlanta. For those who are not familiar, there's construction going on in the Southside Beltline in Atlanta that makes that area prime for redevelopment. There's also an opportunity zone, so obviously some tax incentives investing in the neighborhood. And so there were some drivers, and of course, the announcement in March 2023, which came where essentially the city of Atlanta broke ground on the construction of the Beltline. And so that was very exciting. And then the property being just less than a 5 minutes walk away from an entrance. Excuse me, not feeling great today, but 5 minutes walk away from an entrance. It's very prime real estate, prime value. Um, yeah, so let's dive into it. So that was sort of like the background or drive behind why we invested in it. Obviously, it was demolished. I'll say at least over 50%, and then reconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up.
So David, tell me, David, if hey, tell me, how did y'all find this? How did y'all find this property?
Right.
What made you want to do this property? I know I was a little bit involved with the calculations and such, but
Right. We can get to that, but there's just a few things before we get
yeah,
into that I want to mention for viewers. So, but I'll say, but focusing on like what to look for before we get into specifics of this deal. I do want to mention, like what to look for in looking at your first deal. So a couple of things that I'll say were sort of like new learnings for us being new to development deals. So first is obviously finding a private lender. One of the challenges we encountered, obviously, with the stage one of finding a private lender, and you may find this if you're new to development, is that a lot of private lenders, especially when you're dealing with renovation loans or construction loans, they want experienced investors. So typically they require at least 3 or more prior renovations or redevelopments. In your case, we didn't have that. And going back to, so chime in, let me just use this to answer Chris's question. We found the deal through our realtor. So I always mention that's one of the importance of having and building connections and building relationships. It was sort of like an off-market deal. It was a lady who was essentially, retiring, if you will, liquidating her portfolio. So she had a portfolio of duplexes that she was selling. And then obviously our realtor got a contact with her, and we're also able to like get in contact with other people who were able to buy in the same area. So again, just an emphasis on why it's important to build relationships, build connections. But again, going back to the first challenges, the first one obviously is experienced investor. So in our case, we actually had a lender who we were supposed to close with that pulled away last minute. So pulled away like literally 3 or 4 days before closing. And so that was our first challenge in this project. We had a lender who pulled away 4 days before closing. So the challenge obviously was trying to find another lender. And then I remember actually, I'm gonna put Ife on the spot, but there were several times on this project that like, but I'll say even beyond, and I don't want to focus on, let's say, the failings of contractor, but I'll say like for me personally, like showing, perseverance, pushing through, because there are many times where we could have given up, but I just had the determination that we would not give up, and so pushing through. So I remember literally after we got a cancellation, Ife was freaking out, and I was like, we can't freak out. There's no time to freak out. And so literally got on a call. I kid you not, we spoke with like 20 lenders. I know for a fact I spoke with the first 3 days, I spoke with at least like 10 lenders a day. And I was also working a mortgage broker. And then so I was trying to give up, but God is good too. I'm gonna bring in faith. Faith is important. Because I was gonna end up speaking with an experienced investor, right? Who, believe it or not, was gonna charge us. I didn't even bring this up to my investors because I thought it was ridiculous. Was gonna charge us 15%. It was our realtor that connected me with him. 15% equity with 0% down. That was his offer for us to use him as a co-investor to begin to access loans for funding. Crazy, right? So obviously it wasn't looking bleak, but obviously I was still gonna say, okay, I'll just put this option in the back burner. But God is good. We got literally the following week an option to go with a lender who obviously wasn't cheap. So it obviously came with a premium in terms of our interest, but they did go with us. We're able to retain our equity, so not having to give any equity out to any not experienced investor. But they took a shot on us essentially. And part of the reasons why they did though and if I remember, this is because we own multiple properties. All the investors, myself, Ife, and another investor. So they saw that we own several properties, and so they were willing to take a risk on us. So that's stage one, step one. Rick, Chris, did you have a question? Because I could go on and on. I don't know if you want me to just.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I want to. I think what might be good for the listeners. I think we got like a lot of feedback from our podcast when we kind of talk about when we focus more on like the problems that people can run into, like the struggles, the challenges,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And how did we overcome that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, I think number one, you know, like you said, you need to have a team. I mean, and a team meaning resources, right? And that's part of your team. You know, I hear time in, time out, people getting a realtor, a real estate agent, but not just anybody. Somebody who knows the investing markets, somebody who knows renovation, somebody knows fix and flips, rentals, you know, that kind of thing. You know, and just and can understand ARV, which is, you know, after repair value. That's a pretty common terminology in the investment world. So you want to know somebody, and honestly, a lot of people who do business in this realm, they have a partner or a business partner or whatever that goes and gets their real estate like license. You know, and it doesn't take like years to do, right? So you know, something that people consider. Now the other challenge too that was that, you know, building resources, you know, you be able to talk to people, be able to meet people. But I think one of the big challenges is, you know, just first off is finding a lender, right? Finding somebody. And I mean, you know, you have hard money lenders and you have private lenders, right? So, and for those that don't know the difference, private money lender is someone like us, anybody who invests on, you know, kind of on the side, and you just, you know, specifically like maybe even lawyers, doctors, you know, that kind of thing, people who are willing to invest. And you kind of present to them a deal, and you kind of share with them like what percentage they're going to get, and blah 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 blah. You make it look good. Hard money lenders are essentially like banks, in other words. And there's different companies out there that do hard money lending. There's lending brokerages that go out and find lenders for you. But you still have to present, right? Like David, I remember being on the calls with you and Ife, like, you know, explaining like, hey, this is a duplex off University Avenue, and you know, there's, you know, I mean, they listen to these things, right? Like, somebody hears University Avenue and they're like, I don't know, like what's going on there. Maybe they don't really know. They know that zip code or they know that area, but you kind of have to be able to explain to them, hey, Beltline access, you know, just across the street. You know, there's office spaces being built up. You know, and then they listen to also what you plan to do with it, right? So there's all these different things, right? So when you guys were, I didn't know. I honestly didn't know that y'all lost that lender right at the last minute. Until just recently. I knew I was helping you work with a lender. So I guess tell me a little bit more, like, you don't have to go into all the details, but maybe tell a little bit more about that and kind of what, I know you mentioned you talked to 20 different lenders, but like, you know, was it something specific that they pulled out, they were scared of, or, you know, what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, so you have to think about the time we were buying, right? So that's also why this is critical. But you know, I'll get it. I'll just walk through all the challenges. I figured that's probably the best thing we'll focus on. But so we were buying obviously in fall 2022. We are just coming off the laurels of the peak run, if you will, and obviously really low interest rates, and then the interest rates were going to go back up. So obviously lenders are nervous. Everybody thought 2023 was going to be a crash. Actually, it's funny because Ife too thought that 2023 would go down. I remember we had that conversation. But I actually was very confident, and I put this on my Patreon back in October 2022, that Southeast will hold very well because we'll be in a sort of like a holding pattern, if you will, because of all the people who refinance into lower rates. And my prediction was pretty spot on because obviously we still saw property value on average in Southeast go up in 2023. So that was the bet that we took, essentially. And naturally, you can see a lot of lenders were nervous about that, but thankfully we weren't. And obviously the lender we went with was fine taking that bet. But yeah, to Chris's point, we prepared the whole document. We highlighted essentially the goal of our investments, why we're investing. We were honest in saying that we wanted to use it as a short-term rental post-investment. And so we talked about the development coming up at the Beltline. We talked about how we see the development coming. And obviously we were spot on because shortly after in March, they announced the construction of the Southside Beltline. So we prepared the whole document. Chris also helped us with estimating ARV. And that brings me my second challenge or mistake, if you will. I'm gonna get, like I said, I'm trying to walk through it sequentially, but I'm still trying to be mindful of time. So the second one was obviously with our contractor. So we found a contractor who actually Chris put us in touch with early stages, who agreed to do the job for 180K on initial evaluation while we're closing. And Chris, remember that's the very first company. And then shortly, literally, so I'm talking after the lender pulled out, I'm talking like a day or two later, the contractor came back and I think they said like 290. So they went up by like 110 grand. So that was obviously left us in a panic stage, right? Because that was definitely not what was budgeted and factored in, especially as we're working with lenders, because obviously you need not just how much you're intending to put down, you need to have an estimate of how much your repair costs, your after repair value, present all that. So if your estimates was starting at 180, 200, and then it goes up to like 290, then obviously that blows things away. So that left us in sort of like a panic where we had to now find a new contractor. And then there was another person, he put us in touch with Chris, a lady, and then obviously the one we ended up going with. So safe to say, no. So naturally, the one we ended up going with, it was because of the pulling of the lender and the timing of everything, which is why it just left us in a state of we had to take a bet, we had to take a jump, and that was our best option at the time. And so that leads me to like my third, I guess, say challenge or mistake that we face is hiring inexperienced contractors. And so I'm one of those people that like obviously you want to make sure it works for your ARV, but at the same time you want to make sure. I would say even if it means flexing budget a little bit to go a bit higher to pay for the experience, it counts, because I cannot emphasize. And I'll say it wasn't with ill intent. I will be the first to say that, but I'll say there were definitely a lot of rookie mistakes that were made that were costly mistakes, if you will. And so that's definitely the third one in terms of like hiring experienced contractors. It pays. Definitely being involved and being like Ife was saying, due diligence, visiting sites more often and frequent. That's definitely something I'll say Ife and I dropped the ball on until later, when we eventually sort of like turned up the engine and sort of like working diligently to make sure we finish. But I'll say, yeah, definitely experienced contractor. But on the flip side, I'll say, one of the things we learned is it helps be proactive. Like there are a lot of delays we're experiencing in the cities. I'll say that like we, even with our contractors not being able to push through, we found push through being proactive, reaching out to councilmen. We reached out to councilmen to get stuff done and push through the city of Atlanta. And also accounting for timing of like delays with like permitting and things like that. These are all very important. So I'll say, but most importantly too, is I'll say when you're working through, it's also important to get multiple bids. So, going back to the contract, like getting multiple bids. So I'll say like when you're working through initial stages of your project, don't make the mistake of like relying on one contractor, get multiple bids. And obviously it's funny because my wife obviously works in construction. And so there are a lot of things I was able to talk to her through and be able to point out what we could do differently. So the bid one would definitely help, because in the case of where a contractor pulls out last minute, you have your next best bid. And it's also important that you're vetting through the bids as well, trying to see exactly what their portfolio. Avoid hiring someone that this would be like the first time they'll be taking a job at that scale, especially if it's your first time doing a development as well as an investor, because both of you guys are rookies, and that's the worst things you want to know. All right, so that's essentially the stage that we find ourselves in. And then, but I'll say even more importantly, and one thing that I'll say, going back to Chris's point, finishing, I'll just wrap this up so to avoid being long-winded. It's important to have liquidity. My biggest advice to, and I say if I can probably reiterate this because he took on quite a bit while we're doing this development, was while doing your first development, don't underestimate the need. Like your contingency can quickly expand, especially if something that wasn't anticipated is found out in the process of the project. And liquidity, the worst thing, I learned this from my dad, I learned this from my mentor. The quickest way businesses fail is to be strapped for liquidity when liquidity is needed, right? So if liquidity, so part of the reasons why we're able to take on the out of scope or, you know, increased expense was because we had liquidity, and so we naturally had the chance to finish strong. But I can definitely imagine a scenario where if we didn't have liquidity, I can guarantee you will not be having this conversation, having close and preparing to launch in a week's time, right? And then the third thing I'll say too is site security. Don't underestimate it. Site security is very important, especially if now believe it or not, so we had like everything possible that could go wrong on a project. So we had like obviously funding, budget explosion, that's the best way to call it, where we had to like fund because because of mistakes that were made. We had what was it, so security, so we had like everything from homeless people trying to break in, so like obviously come on, it's the area where it's in the Pittsburgh area,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So we had homeless
It happens in any zip code in Atlanta.
yeah,
Man. I've
yeah,
heard so many stories.
we had our HVAC units stolen.
Yeah,
And so we
both
had
of them.
to,
Both.
right. So we had like funding gone, theft, and what's the third one? That and yeah, and poor management, obviously, where things were not managed properly. But all in all, the biggest thing I'll say is, things could have gone really worse. Like from everything from if our bet was wrong in 2023 and valuations tanked, whew, that would have been rough. The second one was, all in all, believe it or not, even with the delays, we ended up closing at the best possible interest rate in this period that we possibly could,
Yeah.
which is if we had closed in October, our interest rate to be a whole point higher. If we had closed this week, it would have been half a point higher.
Yeah.
And so, so at least since September, October, when we planned on closing till now, we've seen that, yeah, we closed at the best possible interest rate we could. So, like all in all, definitely challenges. Security is important. But I'll say all in all, it's important to be well resourced. I cannot emphasize that enough. Whether that is liquidity, obviously when the time came and we needed to pull out even our contractor from continuing to work on the project and loop in Chris. Chris was instrumental, obviously, in helping us finish during C Strong. Even when it came to working with an insurance broker for the builder's risk insurance to find somebody who could extend month to month. And believe it or not, even with everything, the lenders, we had a lot of favors with the lenders. And that was because of the relationship we built with them over the course of the project. They gave us an extension for free, and even a 2-month extension they gave us at the price of one, right? And they're willing to give us a 3-month extension at the price of one if you need to extend beyond. And even now that they're giving us a special discounted rates, an offer for our next development project if you go with them. So that means, like, obviously now that we're experienced investors, we have the leverage of we can now shop around, but it's good to have that option of like, hey, we have a lender ready to work with us on our next project for a special discounted rate. So all in all, I'll say it's important to build relationships, but definitely be well resourced. Anticipate everything. Have everything from a backup contractor. I'll say Chris was like our backup contractor because we started a project with him and then we finished a project with him. Backup liquidity, right? Ife definitely was needed. Backup mortgage, we needed a mortgage broker for closing. I'll say like just anticipate everything, and also like again, my biggest thing is just be way more involved than you typically would on future projects for your first, especially if you're working with a contractor that is not experienced. Like if I said, the due diligence aspect is definitely key. So
I did have one point I wanted to add there too.
Yeah.
If I could go back in time, I would have said we should have made like a more detailed, like I think we signed a contract, right? But we didn't really put a detailed play-by-play time frame together. If we had done that, we could have, like, I don't want to use the word micromanage, but we could have avoided a lot of the pitfalls that we found with the construction aspect, and I feel like that would have went like so much smoother. Like if we had all the contractual terms, dates, depending on certain things, it would have been way, way smoother.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point Fair brings up, and that's what goes into like lump sum contracts for construction versus tiered contracts, which basically has the construction project broken up into phases, which expected times of completion for each phases, which essentially you can use to hold your contractor responsible, and also you can even negotiate that, hey, if you delay this phase by XYZ, you can expect your payments for the next phase to be impacted.
Did the lender ask for that though? Did they have phases for that or no?
Well,
how did y'all do the draws for construction, or how did that?
Based on so draw request. There's no phases. I mean, technically, you can obviously with construction, there's some phases that need to be completed before others. But if you wanted to put the appliances there with after you're just demolished, technically you could.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, but there was no phases.
Saying,
I mean,
Well,
no,
'cause there's some
But-
lenders I've worked on different projects, and there's some lenders that and that it might be something to consider, especially if you because a project manager is somebody, I mean, you definitely probably want to have but like, because like general contractors, what I've found, and I think a lot of investors that I've talked to have found, are one, they're expensive, and two, they're just not that good. They're not that great. They have a team of subcontractors. Maybe they might have some new ones, or they might know where to find subcontractors and things like that. But a lot of them don't really have a sense of project management. And so, that's definitely a key thing. But if you can't, like, if your budget, like, because David, you and I had that conversation, I was going to be, that project manager, but like looking at the budget, right? Like that's something you got to look at, honestly, in the very beginning, it was like, hey, these repairs are going to be pretty hefty, and adding on a project manager to pay for and ask for a lender for more money to pay for a project manager in a construction loan, it makes the deal not look as good, right? So when that happens, what I've seen is some people will, or some lenders will have certain draws. So they might break out the project into 4 or 5 different draws, and you got to pay for each draw, because I mean it's a bank transfer, right? So so that kind of, it gets included in your budget, but it's like, I think it's like $200 per draw or something like that. But you have to essentially, in their paperwork, you have to essentially put in each draw what is to be completed. So the first draw is going to be, gut the house, tear down the drywall, get the dumpsters, all like that. The second part is going to, and then all the plumbing rough and electrical rough.
yeah.
All that, and then the second draw is this. So what they do is once you've basically said, hey, lender, we want to request draw 1, and this amount that we had already estimated, we want to request from draw 1. They actually send an inspector out. I don't know if they did this for you guys or not, your lender, but they'll send an inspector out to go and take a look at what's done.
Right.
And there might be stuff that's done that's already done that's early,
Yeah, we had the exact same thing, to clarify. So what I'm saying is that the lenders itself don't care how you set up your phase, but yeah, whatever you essentially completed, request a draw. You're expected to fund whatever you complete initially, and then obviously you request a draw, the inspector comes out, inspects, and refund. But that's what we're highlighting, that keep in mind that the inspectors are not necessarily
They're not experienced with this stuff.
yeah, so
You kind of have to be there with the inspector and point
Right.
out, like, hey, this is done, this is, like, and then you can even say, like, I mean, there was some stuff like on another project we had to do, like, a complete septic reinstall on another project that I did, and it required like basically yeah, uproot of like all the lawn and all like that. But see, we already had lawn. We had lawn care or lawn cleanup, like a makeover in the budget already. So they were like, "Oh, dirt's tilled up. Okay, the makeover's done or partially done. We're gonna pay on that, even though that wasn't even part of the project at all." You know, it
Yeah,
was in there, and then there was some stuff that was like, "Hey, the water heater's done," but they, I guess, missed that, or like sometimes they just like I swear, like some of them don't even know what a water heater is.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And I think, yeah, like that's what Phil was saying. Like, definitely important to like definitely don't. I'll say, don't rely on the inspection from the lender's inspector.
Yeah,
That's basically the summary of that. And but all in all, I would say this: we did hire someone who was supposed to be a PM. He did give us phases actually, and I would say there were, in his defense, they did attempt to give estimated time of completion. But I'll give credit that it was a challenging project because there were a lot of hiccups. At least I will admit that. And I can imagine it definitely was a challenging project for someone who's taking their first stab at development. And again, you know, as unhappy as we are with maybe the funding aspect of things, he finished. So I'll
yeah,
give him that credit. He finished, and hey, there's a lot of GCs. Like, okay, so and to put this in context, I want people to remember this was 2022, and like it's different now. Like you find contractors even now. When I was looking hypothetically at something with a friend in Charlotte, you can find contractors now. In 2022, you contractors were scarce. The good ones were scarce because they were
general contractors or subcontractors.
General contractors.
Yeah,
The good ones were scarce. The good ones were busy in 2022. And Chris is right. The good ones are always busy because there's always a pipeline of work coming. And then you're typically left with the not so good ones. There's a reason why they're not so busy, right? Because the truth is, some good contractors, even aside from the ones that we ended up with and that Chris sent us, so contractors are contacting in 2022 after we had that budget increase. We're telling me something as far as they cannot touch the project till some were telling me 4 months, 5 months.
yeah.
But you have to think about this, right? We had just closed, right? We closed in end of October.
so Dave, I have a question for you about that last statement. So hypothetically speaking, right? Because I'm just trying to put it out there for the context. So if you go back in time based on what you know now, would you have gone with the deal with the contractor who would have delayed it 4 months?
No.
Or
So honestly, what I've seen people do, and you guys, I know you guys will start seeing this more as as you continue renovations, right? Like, well, first of all, one thing I want to point out on is that, yeah, you're right, David. Like, you gotta have if you have one, like as far as one contact for everything, you basically have nobody, because if they back out or something happens, I mean, you're scrambling, right? So definitely, but when you're first starting out, you kind of go with the first one, and then you move from there.
Yeah.
And then the next time, as far as like bids and such, I've heard investors, they'll come in and they'll have the contract, all like 3 or 4 maybe contracting companies show up at the same time or right after each other and show them the house. I mean, hey, like, listen, you're not the only one I'm talking to. So that's also a kind of an advantage, because then it's like you get some leverage of like, hey, we want this job. And it seems like other people want this job too. And then like with the lenders, like you guys, finishing it, being that it's your first investment, and and I feel like one of the reasons that the lenders were, helping you guys out is because you showed seriousness in it, right? Like you showed the commitment to the job. You showed commitment to get to the finish line. Lenders like to see that, right? They don't like to see people who just give up, right? That nobody's going to invest in a business that's just just going to give up when times get rough, right? So so that goes a long way to at least get your reputation out there. Now, what some people do, and this is kind of a lot of what happened in after COVID to about 2022, what you saw in 2022 is not only were general contractors scarce, right, and hard to find, but the general contractors that were even around and available, even if they could do it in 4 months, like they just weren't that good, right? They weren't. And so what people started doing is, like, back to your point, building subcontractors, right? Like subcontractors, like they just come in, do the job, and they get out, right? Like, general contractors have to, essentially what they're supposed to do is, obviously have a team of subcontractors, but they're also supposed to manage them in a way that they're not stepping on each other's toes. Like, you got to have this done before you can do this. So you can't put up drywall before the electrical is done, right? So like, they're the ones that subcontractors don't care. They're, they come in, you tell them when they come in, they come in. So what I've started to do is look into, and like what you saw from me is building more of that subcontracting team, right? And people that are listening, like, man, when I first got into real estate, like one of the things I heard was, go to Home Depot at 6 a.m. You'll find subcontractors, right? Like the good ones. If they don't show up till 9, like you show up at 6 a.m. and leave at 7, because if the ones, if there's subcontractors that show up at 9 a.m., you don't want them, because they don't start the job until 11 a.m. And there's like 3-4 hours to the day, right? So like,
I agree with that, and that was sort of the idea, I believe, that the PM we hired was going for, but obviously not perfectly executed. Okay, so to answer Ife's question, would we have gone? Well, I think it was addressed to me. Would I have gone with the contractor who said you can start in 4 months? Several reasons. No. The first one is that contractors can't guarantee a quote for that far out, and so if you take that risk of waiting for when the contractor can start, then there's the risk of, what if their quote jacks up? Because I mean, that's exactly what we saw. Building materials jacked up in 2023. Second risk is, now obviously we saw in hindsight, regardless, just because of how high interest rate was, a lot of refinance on especially duplexes, you had to have the loan at least for a year. So regardless, we're going to have to pay the loan till October, right? So the way I look at it was, we're going to have to pay the loan till October, whether we finish early or whether we finished in October, right? So now the risk of going with someone that said they won't be able to start the job till March or May was, at the time at least, was that, okay, will the person be able to finish in time, right? So I wanted to, given our situation, of course, again, even though he ended up not finishing on time, that was the best decision to make, because would it be worth taking the risk 4 months later, finishing on time, even though regardless, we're going to close before October. But again, more importantly, taking the risk of, okay, what if their quote 4 months from now doesn't fit within the budget? So even at the time, there's no, like, yes, hindsight is 2020, but there is no logical path for me if I was to put myself back in October 2022 that would justify waiting 4 months for a contractor.
Yeah, one of the things that,
unless somehow he was going to guarantee, which none of them were going to do.
Well, I think the way you can mitigate that, David, is to kind of get close to a guarantee. Is when you first find a deal, like, there's no reason why, unless the owner says you can't, but I don't see why not. That would just be ridiculous if they're trying to sell something. You go, you go take a look at the house, right? Like, if you can get inside, take a look at the house, they allow you to be inside, it's fine, right? This house, anybody was inside. I think almost people were inside. So you can, before you even sign paperwork, go ahead and get, I don't know, maybe at least one or two contractors come out.
Right.
Get an idea of the price. And then when because this is kind of what I was helping you guys out in the beginning, was like getting that price, and then based on what your lender says and what the deal looks like as far as the lender, you have your budget. Now you go to your contractors and say, hey, like I think you started doing this too, is like, this is my budget. This is the list of things that need to be done. Can you do this in that budget? Right? Like if you can do that in that budget, right? Like then, you know, you can go ahead and start like even trying to schedule them, right? Because even if you have to cancel, it's not like you're paying anything for them to, you know, you
Right,
come back
but,
to that
but
like,
just one second, Chris. But yeah, so just to clarify, that wasn't a question from Ife, right? So this is we did that, and that's where I mentioned that the contractor pulled out, right, before closing. So the question was, and that's what I want to clarify. The question was, knowing that your contractor pulled out last minute, you have one contractor on hand ready to start the job. You have another contractor that cannot guarantee you a price to and will not start the job till 4 or 5 months out. Would you take the decision of taking the contractor 4 or 5 months out, given that yes, the contractor you brought before you signed papers and everything pulled out on you literally days before closing? So post closing, you find a new contractor, and you find two contractors, one that can start immediately, one that cannot start till 5 6 months out, and sorry, 4 to 6 months out, and cannot guarantee a price. Which one is the most logical choice to make? And what I'm saying is there is no logic or justification for picking a contractor 4 to 6 months out that cannot guarantee your price because they can't start the job till then.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting at. So I mean, the point I'm trying to make is yes, but Chris is absolutely right, and that's what we did, and that's why I was referencing that. But I would argue that even when you're doing that, to your points about like sending your contractors early to give you quotes, do that with multiple contractors, such that if one. So that's the mistake we made. We did that with like one contractor that we thought like, okay, this is solid, this is sure, this is who we're going with. What I'm saying is do it with multiple. Because in the slight chance that one contractor pulls out, you can always go back to other bids that were submitted with other contractors, and you have a better chance of mitigating that. But yes, I agree with your point. But I just want to clarify what that question was from Ife. And in my opinion, at least, I don't think there's justification in taking that bet 4 to 6 months out, putting on a new quote, and then hoping it's within the budget, and then hoping that they would also finish in time. I'd rather take my chance with someone newer who is my only available option right now. And that's ultimately the predicament we're in.
Yeah, and the thing is too is like you know, I'll say this and kind of like summarize, but you know, the thing with that is you take that person that's available, and you, even if like you're going back on what you guys experienced, right? Like y'all just use this same person, you know, same contractor for most of the project.
Very true.
Whereas you could have just at least started with this person and then moved on to someone else, or started like at least while that's going on, get another 2 or 3 contractors out and say, hey, this is what we got going on. This is what's happening right now. This is what we have remaining. What is your what can you how much can you do this for, right? That way at least the project's going, and you can still shop, right? And even if you wanted to find subcontractors, right? Like if you know exactly what needs to be done, which is, again, this is important too for investing in, and you know, David, if you know, I shared this with you all in the beginning, having that list of possible, like there's documents out there, you know, that show like common repairs for renovations, and there's some good ones, there's some not so good ones, but there's some that are very, like the one that I have is very detailed and very to the point. And you know, there's even like minor things that you may not even know, you know, and to have that and to know exactly like how much you're going to be spending on each of those, and be able to explain that to a general contractor and provide them that list of like, hey, we're doing this right now. This is already being covered. I want to know how much you can do this for, or whatnot. And you have different people come in at different times.
Yeah, and that wanted me. I wanted to bring in another point of that, because Chris did mention that you can start and then, you know, get other quotes, and that's why it's also very important to be proactive with you and inspections, because like personally for me and David, I don't know if David 100% agrees with this, but we ramped up the speed a little too late towards like, let's say September, right? Like let's say September, October. As at that time, everything that could have been reversed, there was no going back to get another contractor. Assuming we came in maybe like 2 months earlier, 2 months earlier, we might have been able to assess the site and see if we were like, if we approved of the work that was going on at that point, or if we like, okay, we wanted to go back to the drawing board. But I feel like if we were more, proactive with our independent inspections and not relied on the lender's inspections and not on, the whole experience of the contractor, we could have been able to mitigate some of the things that we were not able to, reverse.
Yeah. But I do want to clarify this though, for the sake of the team. It's not like, and due diligence throughout the entire project is important, and I want to emphasize that importantly too, because it's something to clarify. There was a lot of due diligence for, at least on my end. There was a lot of like following up early on in the project, especially when it came to like the demolition, reframing, early on installing the MEPs. And then the mistake happens because the truth is, with the initial stages of the projects was going very smoothly. Like we were in budget. But what I've noticed is, and talked to my wife was able to clarify some of this to me. A lot of construction projects, a lot of the chances for, I'll say, budget explosions actually start happening towards the end as the project is wrapping up. And I'll say midway towards the end. So I'll say as we started going towards like now actually fittings, finishing, trim outs, things like that, that's where there was started having a lot of issues with the budgeting, right? And so, so to that point, Ife is right, absolutely, there was a delay there, but I'll say even to more quantify things, I'll say we really followed up at the beginning, then got complacent. And so that's even another important part about why, like, when I think about these projects, is like, I'll say like, don't get complacent just because everything seems to be going well smoothly at the beginning. In the midway through towards the end, and especially finishing, things can get crazy. But I know we're coming up on time here, and I want to be time. But yeah, no, it was. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Was there a lot of learnings? Absolutely. But I'll say the biggest one for sure is be resourced, be staffed. Keep in mind, honestly, hindsight is 2020. We saw this deal, we came across this deal in August, decided to go for it in August. And we have between like mid to end of August till October to close, keeping in mind that this was a seller that wanted to sell quickly. So, in general, we didn't have enough time. It was sort of like we were going to hit the ground running. And it was a big risk that we took as new investors in our first development. And so obviously from lenders pulling out, GCs pulling out, having to find a lender last minute, having to find a GC last minute, we had to make do what we had to do. But above all, I'll say being resourced and having liquidity when it mattered was what really helped us see through to the finish line, for sure.
Yeah, for y'all's first project to be a duplex, that's pretty huge, right? That's a commercial sized building, essentially. Most people start off with, small 3-4 bedroom homes, right? So, I do remember in the very beginning, like there was a lot of pressure from the seller. There was a lot of contingencies as far as the sale is concerned, because there was a bunch of duplexes in that area that they owned, and there's all this stuff that was going on, right? And there's a duplex right next door that you potentially guys might hit on, right? But and you just like with this duplex, you just increase the value of you basically set the standard of what the duplex value is of that size in the area, because I remember helping you guys find ARV and finding similar size structures. There were no duplexes. There were no duplexes that were renovated. We had to find houses that were relatively the same size and the same amount of bedrooms. So I think just summarizing here, because I know we're reaching to the end, the big things here, I hear you guys say, and I've heard this as well, is like having that team, having the resources, and honestly, in the beginning, you're not going to have it right away. You know, you just kind of have to roll with the punches and see who you can trust and who you can work with. And the fact is, you don't go into investing, you know, in something like this and be one and done, right? Like you do something like this to continue doing. And the more you do it, obviously, you know, from a lender standpoint, you know, you start to get better rates as you continue to do this type of thing, and then your team that you used before that worked so well, you know, as you continue to give them more jobs, they start to give you, and this is in any business, right? Like any vendors, you start to give them more work, more money. They're gonna start prioritizing you, right? So like
That's important, and that's why you want to season
that 4 to 5 months is gonna turn into 1 to 2 weeks, right? Like maybe almost automatic, right? So that's initially, yeah, you're going to face these challenges, right? In the beginning, you're going to have lenders that don't trust you, and you got to prove to them. You got to prove it. And you know, there's some that, you know, obviously, I mean, they're going to give you a chance, right? But like, you have to like really bite down hard and just like you said, David, like having that liquidity and the backup finances, you know, that's really important as well, because you know, in the beginning, it's not all like butterflies and rainbows of like, oh, it's easy to find a lender, it's so easy to find a contract. Yeah, it's easy to find these people, but it's the hard work is in proving to them, and then also managing and coordinating these teams and building that trust, right? So yeah, but I mean, guys, like, again, you know, congrats on this. I mean, I know it was a lot, and I know we're working on it now. We're getting close to starting to build some revenue now. And you know, we should be launching that for Airbnb this month. So that's going to be really exciting. You know, you guys finished, right? Like there's a lot of people out there. I'm sure, you know, we might get some people that message us. They have projects that they didn't finish. They had to sell, or you know, something happened. I've heard many stories, and even in those situations, even if you have to sell, even if you have to, you know, find an exit strategy in the middle of your project, that's okay too, right? Like, as long as you know, that's part of the gig as well. Is like, you know, you go into an investment, the deal might be good, or you know, it might be kind of tight, but you want to take the risk, but also have an exit strategy, right? Like, remember, as you're building, as you're renovating, your property value is going up, right? So there's also, you know, equity in the middle of construction as well. So remember that too, you know, as options as you kind of go through this, right? It's like there's some people that just get really tight on funds, and it's like, hey, I need to appraise it right now, see where we're at, see what we can get equity for, because you know, I might be tapped out on my liquidity, and I don't want to quit, right? But you know, again, finding the exit strategies, finding you know, you can't just go in with one strategy and just assume that it's going to be, you know, the way to go. You can't go in with one lender and think that this, you know, is going to be the thing. You can't go in with one contractor, right? Like, you know, like that saying I told you, like I said earlier, when it was told to me, like that one equals none, that like hit differently for me, because you know, I deal with that all the time, just managing rentals, right? So so yeah, but yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing that. I mean, that's again, awesome stuff. I know there's some pain in there, but we're gonna, you know, it was, you know, I would say still was a good investment. There's still a lot of potential. I mean, there's a lot of potential with it. I mean, there's still, the area is still up and coming. You know, again, y'all set the standard with the duplex. I mean, there's what, 4 or 5 other duplexes right in that little compound. So you know, you kind of set the stage for that. You've already built the property value significantly, and that helped. You know, obviously, that's good good perspective from a council standpoint. So it was a good. I honestly didn't think of that, but you know, that was a good move to, you know, even invite council members, you know, in the city of Atlanta in on the project, because you know, that affects them too, right? They're actively building stuff right across the street, you know, so that helps them too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Overall, great project. Like I said, the area is developing. Construction is going to finish 2025. The World Cup is coming. We already have 6 figures equity and it's still all in.
yeah.
So yeah, it's blood, sweat, and tears, but I mean, glad we were able to find an exit strategy that involved us keeping the property and cash flowing it. So
Yeah, we got the semifinal for the World Cup, so that's
we can eight games in total. So
yeah, that's huge.
yeah.
All right, well, thanks, guys. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that, and yeah, congrats again.